Imagine standing in a room full of millionaires, but you're the one holding the mop. Everyone sees a nobody, but you're actually the smartest person in the room. This is the story of Aladdin, a man who was mocked for saving pennies while others threw away dollars. They said he would never be more than a cleaner, but today, he owns the very buildings they used to party in. Stay tuned, because how he went from the floor to the throne will change your life. Hi family, welcome back. Let's get into the most inspiring transformation you'll hear all year. Aladdin arrived at the gates of Daria as the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the dusty road. He had nothing in his hands except a small wooden staff and a single copper coin tucked safely into his shoe. While other travelers rushed toward the fancy hotels, Aladdin walked toward the poorest district. He stopped in front of a massive, glowing building called the Gilded Cage. It was the most famous nightclub in the city, where the rich came to waste their gold. Aladdin didn't want to dance or drink, he wanted a chance. He whispered a silent prayer, straightened his dusty shirt, and walked inside to find his future. Inside the club, the smell of expensive perfume and smoke was thick in the air. Aladdin found the manager, a man named Omar, who sat behind a desk counting piles of silver. Omar looked at Aladdin's torn clothes and laughed so hard his belly shook. He told Aladdin that a boy from the gutters had no business in a place of luxury. However, the floors were covered in spilled drinks and broken glass. Omar handed Aladdin a heavy gray mop with a sneer. He called Aladdin the king of dirt and told him to start scrubbing. Aladdin simply nodded, gripped the wooden handle firmly, and began his long journey from the floor. Life in the city was harder than Aladdin had ever imagined. He lived in a tiny, dark room at the edge of the slums where the roof leaked whenever it rained. Every night, his back ached from hours of bending over, and his hands were stained by the harsh soap. While the other workers spent their small wages on fried meat and sweet wine, Aladdin bought only a single loaf of dry bread. He sat alone in the dark, chewing slowly to make the food last. Instead of complaining, he spent his nights on his knees. He thanked God for the job and asked for the wisdom to remain disciplined while others played. As the weeks turned into months, Aladdin became like a ghost in the nightclub. Because he was just a cleaner, the wealthy merchants forgot he was even there. They spoke loudly about their business deals, their secret suppliers, and the prices they paid for silk and spices. Aladdin kept his ears open while his eyes stayed on the floor. He learned which traders were honest and which ones were hiding their profits from the king. He realized that information was more valuable than gold. While he scrubbed the expensive marble, he was actually gathering the blueprints of how the city's wealth truly moved through the hands of the greedy. One rainy Tuesday, a coworker named Jamal pulled Aladdin into a dark corner of the kitchen. Jamal held a small leather bag filled with thousands of cash he had stolen from a drunken customer's table. He told Aladdin that they were invisible to the rich, so they deserved to take what they wanted. Jamal promised that if Aladdin helped him hide the money, they could both quit and live like princes. Aladdin looked at the gold and then at his own stained hands. He knew that stolen wealth would only bring a heavy heart. He refused the offer, choosing to stay poor and honest rather than becoming a thief in silk. Aladdin used his very first month of savings to buy a small, black notebook and a pencil. Every night, after the music stopped and the lights dimmed, he sat by a small candle in his room. He wrote down everything he had heard that day. He listed the names of the merchants who were losing money and the products that people were constantly asking for. He calculated exactly how much the club spent on lemons, ice, and glass. He was no longer just a boy with a mop. He was a student of the empire. He began to understand the heartbeat of Daria better than the men who wore the crowns. Every morning, Aladdin walked to the communal water fount to wash his face before his shift. There, he met a young woman named Yasmin, who fetched water for the local bakery. Unlike the girls at the club who wore diamonds and laughed at his shoes, Yasmin had kind eyes and a gentle smile. She noticed that Aladdin never joined the others at the festivals. When she asked him why he worked so hard and lived so simply, he didn't tell her about the money. He looked at the horizon and said he was building a house that was currently invisible to the world. Yasmin didn't laugh. She simply told him she believed him. 6 long years passed. Aladdin was still the man with the mop, but inside his room, a small chest was slowly filling with loads of money. He wore the same patched trousers every day, and his shoes were held together by bits of string. The other workers at the gilded cage made his life a misery. They would intentionally spill drinks just to watch him clean. They called him the broke scholar because he was always reading. Aladdin never fought back. He let their insults slide off him like water off a stone. He knew that a man who controls his temper can eventually control his destiny. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the nightclub changed. The music wasn't as loud, and the crowds grew smaller. Rumors began to spread that Omar had been stealing from the club's true owner, a wealthy but tired nobleman. The business was drowning in debt, and the bank was threatening to lock the doors forever. Omar was desperate, looking for anyone to lend him money to cover his tracks. He asked the rich merchants, but they all turned their backs on a failing business. The Temple of Gold was about to turn into a tomb of shadows. Aladdin realized the moment he had prayed for had finally arrived at his feet. Aladdin did something that no one expected. He washed his face, straightened his humble tunic, and walked into the owner's private office. Omar was there, crying and begging for more time. Aladdin didn't say a word. He simply placed a heavy bank draft on the mahogany desk. It was the exact amount needed to pay the club's immediate debts. The owner's eyes went wide as he read the numbers. He looked at the boy who usually cleaned his toilets and saw a savior. He asked where the money came from. Aladdin replied that it was the price of 6 years of hard savings. The owner accepted the money and made Aladdin a silent partner, owning 10% of the business. However, Aladdin made one very strange request. He insisted that he must keep his job as the janitor. He didn't want the staff or the customers to know he was now a boss. He wanted to keep his eyes on the ground to see who was truly loyal to the business and who was only loyal to the paycheck. So the next night, Aladdin picked up his mop again. He worked in the shadows, watching Omar's every move, knowing that he now owned a piece of the man who hated him. Jamal, still thinking Aladdin was a powerless servant, decided to play a cruel trick. He broke an expensive vase in the VIP lounge and blamed Aladdin in front of a crowd of guests. Omar arrived, screaming at Aladdin and calling him a useless rat. He threatened to take away Aladdin's wages for the entire month to pay for the damage. Aladdin stood there calmly, letting the manager yell until his face turned purple. He didn't defend himself, even as Jamal smirked behind Omar's back. Aladdin felt a strange peace. He knew that very soon, the roles would be reversed and the truth would finally come out. With his first share of the club's profits, Aladdin didn't buy a car or a new house. Instead, he heard about a large, broken-down warehouse near the docks that no one wanted. The roof was gone and it was filled with rats. The city people called it a junk pile, but Aladdin saw a golden opportunity. He used every penny he had to buy the land. His coworkers mocked him even more, saying he was a fool who traded his savings for a pile of trash. Aladdin didn't explain his vision. He just spent his mornings repairing the walls before heading to the club to mop the floors. A sudden trade war began, and the ships coming into Daria were blocked for months. The city ran out of storage space for the few goods that did arrive. Suddenly, every merchant was looking for a safe place to keep their cargo. Aladdin's junk pile was now the only empty warehouse left in the entire district. He didn't overcharge them, but he made sure he was paid fairly. Within weeks, the warehouse was making more money than the nightclub itself. The janitor was no longer just a partner. He was becoming a tycoon. Yet, he still showed up at the club every night with his gray mop. The nobleman who owned the gilded cage grew older and decided it was time to leave the city forever. He offered to sell the remaining 90% of the club to Aladdin. He knew Aladdin was the only one with the discipline to keep the business alive. Aladdin signed the papers in secret, becoming the sole owner of the most famous building in Daria. He told the nobleman to announce that a great prince had bought the club and would arrive in 1 week. Aladdin wanted to give the staff one last chance to show their true colors before he finally revealed his face to the world. The news of the new owner spread through the club like wildfire. Omar and Jamal were terrified. They wanted to impress the new boss, so they worked the staff harder than ever. The night of the grand reveal arrived. Aladdin went home to his small room for the last time. He took a long bath, washing away the smell of bleach and sweat that had been his constant companion for years. He took out a custom-tailored suit made of midnight blue silk, which he had hidden under his bed. He put on a pair of soft leather boots that didn't have any strings or patches. He looked in the mirror, but he didn't see a janitor or a prince. He saw a man who had kept his promise to God and to himself. He was ready to claim his throne. The gilded cage was packed with the most powerful people in Daria. The music was playing, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter. Omar stood at the entrance, wearing a fake smile and looking at every carriage that arrived. He kept shouting for the janitor to come and clean a small wine spill near the stage. Jamal was also looking around, hoping to find a way to impress the mystery prince. The big doors at the front finally swung open, and the music stopped instantly. A man walked in with a presence that commanded the entire room. It was finally time for the end. Aladdin walked straight through the center of the room, his head held high. Omar didn't recognize him at first because of the expensive silk and the way he carried himself. When Aladdin reached the VIP table, Omar tried to stop him. "You can't sit there, that's for the prince," Omar shouted. Aladdin stopped, looked Omar in the eyes, and spoke in the same calm voice he had used for years. He pulled the deed of the building from his pocket and laid it on the table. "I am the owner," Aladdin said firmly. "And you, Omar, are officially fired from my establishment." The room went silent. The shock in the room was so thick you could almost touch it. Jamal dropped a tray of glasses, and they shattered at his feet. The coworkers who had spent years mocking Aladdin's dry bread and his patched shoes couldn't even speak. Aladdin stood before them and said he had watched every lie and every act of cruelty from behind his mop. He told them that he didn't build his empire with luck, but with the discipline they lacked. He kept the hard workers but sent the bullies away. The man they called the King of Dirt was now the king of their world. Years passed, and Aladdin's empire grew even larger. He owned 5 of the most successful clubs and warehouses in the city, but the fame didn't change his soul. Every morning at 5 o'clock, before the sun touched the palace towers, Aladdin was in the house of God. He prayed for the strength to remain humble despite his riches. After his prayers, he didn't go to meetings, he went home. He had married Yasmin, the girl from the water well. He spent his mornings playing with his young daughter, proving that his true wealth wasn't in his bank, but in the love of his family. One afternoon, a beggar came to the back door of Aladdin's office. It was Omar, looking thin and defeated. He had lost all his money after being fired and couldn't find work anywhere else in Daria. Aladdin had every reason to turn him away or laugh at him the way Omar had laughed at the King of Dirt. Instead, Aladdin remembered his faith and the importance of mercy. He didn't give Omar a bag of cash, which would have been wasted. Instead, he handed him a mop. He told Omar that if he worked hard and remained honest, he would be given a second chance. Aladdin's son was born a few years later. As the boy grew, Aladdin made sure he understood the value of a hard day's work. On the boy's 10th birthday, Aladdin took him into a private room in their palace. On the wall, framed in gold, was the old, gray, dirty mop Aladdin had used during his first 3 years. "Never forget where we came from," Aladdin told his son. He explained that money can be lost in a day, but the character you build while cleaning a floor will stay with you forever. The boy looked at the mop with more respect than the money. As Aladdin grew older, the people of Daria realized he was more than just a rich businessman. He used his profits to build free schools for the children of the slums and clinics for the elderly who had no one to care for them. He became the father of the city. He lived his life with 3 rules: devotion to God, loyalty to his family, and honesty in his work. He proved that you don't need magic or a lamp to change your life. You only need the determination to stay standing when everyone else expects you to fall to your knees. Aladdin lived a long and peaceful life, surrounded by his grandchildren and a city that loved him. One day, he looked out at the city of Daria and smiled. He had turned a mop into a scepter and a leaky room into a kingdom. His story became a legend that was told to every child who felt invisible or small. The lesson was clear. The world will laugh at your discipline until they have to ask you for a job. What lesson do you take from Aladdin's journey? Do you believe determination is stronger than luck? Let me know in the comments below. Stay blessed.